Look, if I'm being honest, up until the trailer hit, I had zero expectations for Werewolf by Night. Which isn't to say I thought it would be bad or had low expectations. More like I had no expectations. I wasn't following the production news, I wasn't thinking about the release date, and I only had a passing knowledge of the character. It wasn't on my radar. But wow, what a freaking trailer. Just... Let's circle back to that and talk about the current phase of the MCU for a moment, because I think we need context here. I, like much of the general public, I think, have had kind of mixed feelings on Phase 4 of the MCU. It's been fun, mostly, but you certainly can't make the argument that there's been a lack of content. Some of these shows, and the Phase 4 movies, have been amazing. Loki, WandaVision, Spider-Man No Way Home, all great things. Some have been fairly underwhelming too. At least to me. Don't get me wrong, even the underwhelming ones I've enjoyed, at least mostly. But for example, I'm not likely to go rewatching Hawkeye anytime soon, despite how much I love those characters and Vincent freaking D'Onofrio.
Mind your own business!
Seriously, he's amazing. And there are other shows that I can't quite decide exactly how I feel about them. It's still currently airing as of this recording, but the jury is still out on She-Hulk, for example. Get it? Jury? Because lawyer? Ha. But overall, Phase 4 has felt like experimentation by Feige and the MCU. It's like an awkward teenage growing pain sort of phase where the creative team is trying to figure out just exactly how to expand, draw in new fans, and outgrow the success of the Infinity Saga. I also kind of think this phase has been a response to the most common complaint critics have levied against the MCU for years. Specifically, those that have complained basically since the first Avengers movie that Marvel movies are formulaic, afraid to take chances and make bold choices, and just too interconnected to keep up with. MCU Phase 4 has definitely not felt as interconnected and perhaps cohesive as the Infinity Saga was, at least not to the casual viewer. And ironically, I've observed a growing complaint now that the MCU doesn't feel connected enough. Is that the same group of people who used to complain it was too connected? Probably not. But it's still interesting. Maybe even worth an entire separate video just to discuss the state of Phase 4. Let me know down in the comments if you'd want to see that video. Back to the point of experimentation. Phases 1 through 3 of the MCU did explore their fair share of genres across different movies. Winter Soldier was a spy thriller, Ant-Man 1 and 2 were both heist movies, and Thor Ragnarok was essentially an action comedy. But they all only went so far. They often would take what they need from the genre and leave the rest, not very often taking bold choices in the editing room or within the plot. Now in Phase 4, I think we've begun to finally see Feige and company cut loose a little bit, giving interesting and unique directors and writers the ability to make very strong, impactful choices across writing, production, and the editing room. Not all of Phase 4, mind you. Black Widow stands out as a bit of a dud, despite Scarlett Johansson, Florence Pugh, and David Harbour putting in amazing performances.
It still fits.
And say what you will about the movie's plot and its use of Wanda Maximoff, but watching Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness showed the biggest change in the MCU mindset to me. I remember thinking as I watched the movie a few months ago, holy crap, Marvel's ready to take some chances.
What mouth?
That movie didn't just feel like Marvel tapping Sam Raimi to make an MCU film. It felt like a true Sam Raimi movie that also happened to be in the MCU. Sure, it wasn't full-fledged horror, but from the visual choices, to the violent cameo deaths, to the trippy editing, to the ghosts and zombie body, and the delightfully weird music and scoring, it was different. The biggest experiment Marvel has taken. Which brings us back to why we're talking about this at all.
Werewolf by Night.
The incredibly stylized trailer for this special presentation gives me hope this is an experimental iteration following the recipe from Doctor Strange 2. Give an interesting director with a mind for horror the reins to a lot of the creative control. The trailer alone is such an awesome blend of modernized classic horror tropes, B-movie horror comedy.
Good luck. I'll be rotting for you.
And grindhouse horror styles. I absolutely loved it. For me, it almost gives off an energy similar to the faster-paced chunks of The Lighthouse, which is one of my favorite films in recent years. So what does Werewolf by Night need to do now that it's suddenly on our radars? And what could it do? And what does it mean for the MCU going forward? Well, first off, it needs to deliver on its promises. If the very first trailer gave us teases of grindhouse and campy horror madness, the actual show needs to be absolutely jam-packed with that. We need erratic, trippy editing, over-the-top performances, and squishy blood splatters straight to the camera, more than just the one shown in the trailer. If Werewolf by Night doesn't commit now to these tropes and aesthetics, it's going to feel like a disappointment, regardless of how good the story is or may be, which would be an absolute shame and waste of a good story. In that same vein, the story itself needs to double down on true horror, not just the horror aesthetic. We need the tragic human elements of a good horror movie, along with hefty amounts of suspense, uncertainty, meaningful violence, symbolism, practical effects, and one heck of a strong plot twist or hidden element to uncover.
I'm not the werewolf.
Heck, I don't normally advocate for jump scares. I think they're often overused, but given the tone we've established with the trailer, throw a few of them into the show. Werewolf by Night is also going to need to play a very, very delicate balancing game with its connection to the MCU. On the one hand, I think the story itself needs to be largely self-contained. Mentions of Iron Man or watching one of the monster hunters eat a bowl of Hulka Hulka burning fudge.
Hulk burning fudge is our favorite.
That's a thing.
Will distract and detract from the supernatural, horrifying tone it needs to maintain. But I think it's incredibly important that this ties clearly to the proper MCU by the time the presentation comes to a close, in a way that casual viewers will pick up on. That's important. It can't simply be Easter eggs for people like me. But again, it should fit the supernatural, spooky aesthetic. An initial appearance by Blade would have been perfect for this, but rumors lately are that we are not going to get that. So what would be a good alternative? Honestly, I'm not sure. But I'm sure if Feige tries hard enough, he can think of something and surprise us. Speaking of Blade, Werewolf by Night, more so than any project in Phase 4, outside of arguably Loki and Multiverse of Madness themselves, has the opportunity to launch the MCU into totally new territory in its upcoming phases. Moon Knight dipped a toe into the supernatural and the occult, and I think Werewolf by Night needs to freaking cannonball into the blood pool of the magical. That sounds really messy, doesn't it? The supernatural corner of the MCU is coming, one way or another. Blade is on its way, Agatha Harkness and witches will be returning, Moon Knight is going to be back, the Black Knight himself has been teased, and Kevin Feige said the name Ghost Rider out loud to a reporter.
Hey man, Brian wants to be Ghost Rider. What else? Who else?
We may be, as many have already suspected, truly on our way to a Midnight Suns Avenger-style movie. And as a horror filmmaker and lifelong comic book nerd, I would
Kill for that movie.
not literally. Promise. I think that whole corner of the MCU needs to be unafraid to lean heavily into not just what Marvel stands want, but what horror lovers crave. These films can't all be traditional MCU blockbusters. It won't work, not when horror and the occult are ostensibly the subject material. Think way back to the Wesley Snipes Blade movies. They were beloved by fans, and they were absolutely gory and bloody and campy. And it worked. Because that's, visually and tonally anyway, what vampires and werewolves and witches are. Horror and violence. The harder that Werewolf by Night leans into the gore, the tropes, and the scares, while telling a good story that is still important, the more confident Disney and Marvel and Feige will be that Blade and company can take up the horror sword and run with it even further. So all that said, I guess what I'm saying is that Werewolf by Night now has the potential to be one of, if not the most important MCU project following the end of Endgame.
Impossible.
It doesn't need to be the biggest or the best, but it needs to blaze a new path. It absolutely cannot be undercooked and only touch on its genre and inspiration. Just like the Guardians of the Galaxy, this unknown Marvel character can push the overall cinematic universe to greater heights, or I guess in this case, to spookier depths. So Marvel, Please, I know it's a little late to be saying this, but like, don't waste this opportunity. And with spooky season just around the corner, if you guys and gals are looking to add more horror into your life, you can check out one of my original short horror films right here. Or click over here to talk about something. I haven't decided yet what I'm going to put there, but I promise it's going to be good. It's going to be good. Thanks as always for watching, film friends, and I'll see you in the next video. Cut.